Well, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this meeting. My name is Amedeo Santososa. I'm a professor at the COMEST, a professor at IUSS Pavia, and a member of COMEST, that is the mission of the UNESCO dedicated to the ethics of science and technology. And I have the pleasure to introduce the rector for his address. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Amedeo, and welcome each of you, both in presence in this room, this, let me say, fantastic room in IUSS Pavia, this very ancient building, which is called Broletto, in this square in the center of Pavia, and also both to people at home who is attending to this meeting. This meeting is a very important occasion for use for our school. You know that this is a very small university, is a school of advanced study, and we focus in particular on some theme that combine different disciplines. We like very much to face the problem of the new problem of the world, combining disciplines, which is almost rare in our approach to education and research, and we try to force in this direction, so that the theme of climate change is one of these, of course. And this occasion, this opportunity, and I want to thank again Amedeo Santososa, because as a member of the COMEST working group of UNESCO on the ethics of science and technology, proposed to organize the meeting of the working group of COMEST here in Pavia in these days. And we ask the opportunity to combine the working group that I thank to be with us in these days with some of the students of our PhD. We have a very particular PhD, which is an experimentation for us, for Italy, and probably also for other countries. We try to define a PhD course which is not so vertical as normally are in the disciplines, in deeply understanding, but to put together people and students that come from different backgrounds to work together to face a very global and no-disciplinary problem as sustainability and climate change. And so we tried to do that, and we obtained the starting of this project with a very large number of universities participating and a very large number of students. The first cycle we started last year in 2021. We had almost 30 universities for 100 students. And the last year, in 22, we had 50 universities with 100, almost 40 students. And this year, we are almost starting, probably we reach more university, and we can reach the maximum number now. We are talking 150. So with the first 3 cycles active, we supposed to have almost 400 students. So it's a very large, incredibly large number of PhD for one PhD. And the idea is that to mix together background, experience, and to face problem with a very broad mentality, not to focus with my own expertise is the best, because we are used to that in university. We like to be the center of the knowledge, but we are not. And so to match the other, to exchange experience is very important. And this occasion to discuss together with the COMEST working group that again is participated by people that come from different geographical area, different backgrounds. I believe that is an important occasion that we like to host here in IUSS. When we call global, when you use the word global to indicate problems, for instance, it's very used. The word global is probably most used in most cases that are appropriate. Anyway, I want to use global today for the theme of this conference, thinking at two different meanings. One is the global in terms of international, planetary problem. Global because everyone, every people in the world should be faced with the problem of exchanging the environment. We call exchange not necessarily indicated that is going to be better or worse, but the exchange is important. This is first. The internationality is a global. And the other word in which I like to focus today with this globality means that is matching of different, in our case, disciplines, background, so starting from social sciences to humanities, from medical, biological viewpoint to scientific, to technological and philosophical and so on. So we should come together to a very important and difficult effort in facing without any hat, this is mine, this is yours. We should work together. This is difficult, I know, but it's very important. It's a new area for science and research. It's the area to mix together and face the problem and on the disciplines. So this is my viewpoint. I believe and I hope that this morning we have the opportunity to exchange experience, to exchange viewpoint, and also sort of effort to look at the future as our field of research. And again, I want to thank both Amedeo for organizing everything here and Mario Martina, who is in charge to manage this PhD course to have organized and have this success of participation in terms of quality of participants, because we are used to measure the numbers. We like to measure the quality. Okay? So thank to be here for every of you. Okay.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Ricardo. Now we have Gabriela Ramos, with the adjunct general director of UNESCO, wanted to join us in person, but it was not possible. And so she sent us a short video that we hope
Mario, forse.
Yeah, we share the screen. Oh, no.
Multidisciplinarity is the dean is managed technology, and you can drive the car for
I like
taxi
the
driver.
IT guys, and it's a good. Okay. Let me also share the audio. Yeah.
It's wonderful that so many of you can gather in person at the University of Pavia, and that experts from COMEST and its president from around the world could join this important event. I would have loved to be there in person, but you know what are the fates of ADGs.
Mario, you're not sharing the screen.
Latest unit emission gap report is clear. We are.
I spoke too quickly.
Me too, me too.
Interrompi condivisione. Ok, allora vediamo prima di spostare questo. Vediamo.
Oh, good.
Vediamo se riusciamo a chiudere questo qua. E now...
Oltre da 0, 28 secondi persi. No, 4 da 0.
It's wonderful that so many of you are gathered in person at the University of Pavia. And experts from colleges and experts from around the
So people from remotely connected that can hear the video, can hear the audio.
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear and see it
Okay,
now.
very
Thank
well.
you.
So we are all set. Thank you.
It's wonderful that so many of you are gathered in person at the University of Pavia. And that experts from COMEST and its president from around the world will join this important event. I would have loved to be there in person, but you know where I can pay so many fees. The latest unit emission gap report is clear. We are not delivering on the commitments of the Paris Agreement on climate. Policies currently in place internationally are projected to result in a 2.8 centigrade temperature increase this century, with no credible pathway to the 1.5 centigrade in place. The IPCC stressed that limiting world global warming to 1.5 centigrades necessitates rapid, substantial, and sustained reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, including cutting global CO2 emissions by 45% by 2030 and reaching net zero emissions around the middle of the century. We know even that 1.5 degrees was the maximum we could endure to avoid major catastrophes. But we are not yet there. And in international conference, we continue discussing whether we can include fossil fuels in a communique. And we know what we need to do. We need to deploy ourselves on carbon. We need to use all of the economic instruments. We need to bring the financial sector. We need to go into renewables. We know how many things need to change for humanity to deliver in these very important commitments. And we also need to discuss issues like the ones you are going to be addressing today on climate engineering, but do it with care. And that's why I'm so glad that the Congress is dealing with these issues. The technologies that you are going to be discussing today and that deliberately alter the climate system should be handled with care. The techniques for the removal of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide removal, and for the reduction of the heating effects of these gases, solar radiation modification, that are collectively known as thermostat engineering, are already there, and we know it. Investments in the field have been largely increasing over the past years. National and regional research plans are flourishing around the world. But many questions remain unanswered. How do we take decisions regarding something so fundamental as interventions into the atmosphere or into the ecosystem without the uncertainties and the risk it entails? Who will take the decisions? Where will they be deployed? And how do we measure the impact? So despite all the unknown parameters that go along with climate engineering, it gives us one certainty. With the largest scale risk it entails for our planet, for human rights, and for the future generations, these technologies must not be deployed without global governance and inclusivity. I would say they should not be developed if we don't have the transparency and inclusivity. We know, for example, that outdoor experiments tend to be conceptualized in the north, but conducted in the global south. Here and there,
we are already seeing tensions rising. For example, with my own country, imposing a ban on solar geoengineering last January, because all the doubts and because all the questions that I just shared with you that are no. We need to hear all voices from all disciplines and from all regions of the world, not only all those who are developing the technologies. And in fact, this is exactly one of the main issues. The one who is developing the technologies, what are the drivers? Where is the transparency, the accountability? That as all these emerging technologies are to be with artificial intelligence are key. And the debate you are having today on climate engineering is therefore not a technological debate. It's a societal debate. It entails governance and political issues that raise a myriad of ethical questions. So building on the fantastic work of the comments on these issues, these are the questions we brought at the fore to our event at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh last year. And we are now in discussions with the climate overshoot commissions, which want to know UNESCO's stance and involvement in this debate and the next steps. Always at the forefront of the ethical reflection of scientific and technological advancements, I trust that comments will continue to pave the way in the right direction with the report that you are preparing, and that you will propose bold and actionable recommendations on the way forward. And actually, even just to make sure people know what we're talking about, make sure that these things are happening, and make sure that everybody needs to be engaged and everybody needs to say something, because it's our only planet. I would really like to thank Professor Amedeo Santos-Corso, who is our dear member of COMEST and main negotiator of the ethics of AI recommendation. And I know many of you, Emma and Peter, Paul, and many are you around the table. But I want to organize Amedeo for organizing the meeting of the working group COMEST and this public symposium today. And I wish you all the best for what promises to be an extremely important debate. Because as usual, your service, your wisdom, your view of how things should be handled is of extreme importance in this very complex agenda. Thank you very much.
Very well. Thanks to Gabriela Ramos video for the support and the suggestions. And now you are in the hands of Mario Martina, who is the chair of the first session.
Who are you? Who are you? Thank you, Amedeo. And first of all, let me thank the member of the working group of this commission for being here. It's really a pleasure and honor for us to host this important symposium within your actual work. As you probably know, they were available to open the doors of the room where they actually discuss. To host our PhD students, a sample of them are here, another sample of them is connected remotely in Zoom, and I thank all of them for participating, and I thank also the other guests. This was really an important opportunity for the PhD students. As Riccardo, our rector, was saying before, we set this project with the idea of using the different disciplines, the different skills that we have in the academia as tools to discuss of real problems. The final aim of our PhD is not to prepare, to train PhD students to become professors. They can, if they want, of course, and if they have the opportunity. But the most important thing is to give them the opportunity to understand the problems, to try to propose solutions, and to go beyond the barriers of disciplines, to discuss about problems and also to think out of the box about solutions for the next future. I thank, of course, Amedeo Santosuoso. You know, he's one of the youngest professors we have in our university, because he's recently joined us. But I'm saying that also because he's really full of energy. I always say that he seems more like a young PhD student that just at the beginning of his career. And he's very generous because he's full of ideas, and as you know, is able to, you know, collect people from different corners of the world. And thank you. He's also a very close friend of us now. Let me introduce now, as you know, this morning we have two panels. I'm the chair of the first panel. First of all, please be very comfortable. We will be very informal. Both speakers and also you audience, feel free also to make questions and also suggestions, anything that you think is relevant for our discussion. It's a very dense day, so I'll try to be very strict in timing. So please forgive me if I try at the end to cut a little bit or to fasten a little bit your intervention. So how the panel is organized? Of course, as you see, this topic, climate engineering, is of course very, very trendy and important. One of probably the possible solutions that we have on the table for the next very close future. Is probably the first time in the human history that we are talking solutions, problems that regard the entire Earth system, the entire globe. And this is also a complex problem from decision-making. Before we heard Gabriella saying that is a problem also of how to take decisions for the whole world that we share. And talking about climate engineering is also a large-scale intervention that has different aspects to consider, technological, technical, and other aspects that we'll touch today. The Earth system is very complex just to be understood and to be studied. Imagine if we also would like to have the Earth system as a model to understand how it reacts to something that is not natural or something that is not happened in the history before. Okay, this becomes a very uncertain problem. Is a very a problem affected of a lot of uncertainty, both in the science, scientifically, technically, but also uncertainty in terms of what will be the prediction of our intervention. Okay. As I was saying before, this was posed on the table as a potential solution. Some will say that is a quick and effective solution that will probably be possible to put in place in a very short time with respect of other solutions that we have on the table, and could be also cost effective. Other would argue that there are other problems related with the uncertainty, for instance, of this solution, with the unpredictable estimation of the effect. But also what we will touch today, and what is the subject of the working group, is the ethical implications in these solutions. And this will be the perspective that we will touch today. Because one of the concerns is the moral hazard within the solution of these, and also the implication in terms of, for instance, how we will react with a solution that will not ask us to change our habits to reduce CO2 emissions, for instance. And is also a problem that will probably give us a false sense of security, okay? Instead, as you know, many other scientific solutions on the table are going in a different direction, you know, working with the structure of our society, technologies that we will produce the same product with low emissions, for instance, something like that. So we have a lot of open questions, and I'm very glad today to have experts and members of this working group, which actually are working together, coming from different disciplines, to discuss and put the puzzles, different pieces of the puzzle together to give a big picture to the problem, to the big commission, and then to the international community. We already touched, and talking to the PhD student, how difficult it is to study complex problems and to transfer our perspective to decision makers in a very understandable, clear, and simple way. And this is probably also your task, which is a quite a difficult task. So let me introduce then the panel. We will have 4 speakers, and it's very interesting because there is a fil rouge connecting all these speakers. The first will be Ines Camilloni from University of Buenos Aires. She will talk about risks and benefit. Okay, so as a first introduction, yeah, Ines, you can come here while I'm talking. Risk and benefit, so cost and benefit of this potential solution, and we'll give you an overview of the climate engineering solution. Then we'll have Emma Rutkamp-Bloem from University of Pretoria. She will set the ethical framework, okay, which will be our perspective today, and will give us a general overview. What are the ethical concerns about this problem? Then we'll have Benham Taebi from Delft University. In video, sorry. From it will be a video talk talking about the uncertainties. I touched already this problem of climate engineering, so it's more a technical perspective. And then we'll move to Chris Guillot. That is a senior advisor of the AGU, the American Geophysical Union. Again, from their perspective, what is the ethical framework of the climate engineering strategies? Okay, so as you see, we have a very interesting speeches today. So I leave the floor to Ines. Thank you, Ines. And Ines, you have 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mario, for the introduction. And thank you, Amedeo, for the invitation to be here. Yesterday, we have a really very productive discussion. So it's nice to keep talking about this. I need to make this.
Yeah. Sorry. Sorry. First of all, this is the presentation, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And now we have we need to. Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Very much.
Who is connected in Zoom? Do you see the screen? Yeah. Okay. Yes. The full screen, correct? Is the slide mode? Okay. Very well.
Okay. Well, let's start then. So climate change is already producing many multiple impacts and also interacting risks to both human society and environment. And what we expect is that this risk will go worse during with any additional warming. So managing all these risks requires a different portfolio of different policy responses. And all these responses could rely on different specific objectives, for example, to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, or to reach the Paris Agreement temperature goals, for example, or to keep the sea level rise under certain levels, or we can consider also different economic objectives or any other climatic goals. So the different strategies we have to address this risk are in the first place mitigation. And this relates to reduce greenhouse gases emissions. And this is the way where the greenhouse gases emissions have been increasing during the last 30 years. And this is what we have. We have an increase, which just is a decrease in 2020 related to the pandemic, but in 2021, there was again an increase in the greenhouse gases emissions. We very soon recovered to the levels we used to have before the pandemic. The other strategy we have available to manage the risks related to climate change is the different technologies for carbon dioxide removal. And in this sense, these technologies are related to reforestation and afforestation, and also carbon capture and storage, and bioenergy and carbon capture and storage, what we call BECCS. These technologies are available, but not in the scale that we need to remove the large amount of CO2 we are emitting into the atmosphere. And this is the result. This is how the CO2 concentrations have been increasing during the last 40 years. And if we compare the last year to the pre-industrial levels of the CO2 concentration, there was an increase of around 50%. So we are not doing well on mitigation. We are not doing well on carbon dioxide removal. And we have a third strategy related to adaptation. And this means how we can work on the climate impacts, knowing that this means that we are already seeing some damages, and there are also permanent losses related to climate change, and adaptation has limits. We cannot adapt to any kind of changes in climate, and there are also some risks related to maladaptation strategies. So the very question is, how can we address and reduce the near-term risks associated to climate change if we are not doing well related in these strategies of mitigation, carbon dioxide removal, and also adaptation? And this is what we call the napkin diagram or the peak shaving diagram. You can see we have time, and we also have the amount of warming or the amount of greenhouse gas concentrations or impacts related to climate change. And under no emissions policies, this is the worst case scenario, we have very important increase in this greenhouse gases concentration or impacts of climate change. If we have some policy related to reduction of greenhouse gases emissions, we can expect at least a reduction in the magnitude of the impacts of climate change. And we have there the result of the other strategy related to carbon dioxide removal. And under this scenario, we can expect a significant reduction of the impacts of climate change, but there's a problem of time. We can see this reduction, but from mid-century and after that. So here we have the situation. We have this new strategy related to solar radiation modification, and this is the way where we can go from point A to point B to reduce in a very fast way the impacts of climate change. And this strategy related to solar radiation modification includes different technologies, for example, the injection of aerosols, small particles into the lower stratosphere, and also the marine cloud brightening, introducing salt particles into the clouds to make them more reflective. And other options are related to make the cirrus clouds more thin, the high clouds we have into the atmosphere. And also there are some other strategies to make the surface more reflective. And one of the important issues related to this strategy to solar radiation modification is addressed in this report that was prepared by UNESCO, and it was published 2 months ago. And one of the main key messages of this report is that solar radiation modification is the only option that could cool the planet within years. It's the only technology that is potentially available, not far in time, that could cool the planet during or at the same time that we are reducing the greenhouse gases emissions, and we work on carbon dioxide removal. So, although we have this technology that could that potentially could lower the climate impacts, it has another issue that it could introduce new risks to the Earth system. And this is important why we need to understand the feasibility of this technology, and also the risks and also the benefits that all these technologies that we have available could introduce in the climate system. For example, related to solar radiation modification, one of the risks is related to the possibility of an overcompensation of climate change at regional scale. And this is an example. If we compare the world with a double concentration of CO2 into the atmosphere, this is the warming we can expect. More warming in high latitudes, in particular in the northern hemisphere, but in general in the whole system. And if we cool the planet, introducing these particles into the stratosphere, producing some kind of uniform aerosol layer into the stratosphere, we can expect a reduction in global temperature. As you can see, the general warming will be around 0. But in some places, there will be a cooling and there will still remain some warming in high latitudes in particular. So the effect will be overcompensated in some regions where it will produce an additional cooling. And other effects are related to potential damages on the ozone layer, related to the composition of the aerosol that could be introduced into the stratosphere. They are related to sulfide, and also increasing or redistributing climate change impacts on society and ecosystems. If solar radiation modification deployment is abruptly terminated, there's this issue that we call the termination shock that could produce a rapid increase in temperature, and this would increase also risk to humans and ecosystems. And there are also risks related to society. For example, the efforts to mitigate the greenhouse gases emissions could draw away the efforts on mitigation, and also solar radiation modification deployment could increase power imbalances between nations and produce some conflicts and raise ethical, moral, legal, equity, and justice issues. So the general idea is how we can address this issue and on solar radiation modification to identify if it will increase or decrease the overall risk related to climate change. And to do that, there is a framework that we call the risk-based framework to compare the work with solar radiation modification in comparison with the work without solar radiation modification to address the impacts of climate change. So the idea is that we should compare a work where we follow the arrow you see to cool the planet, and not a work. We're not comparing an ideal world without climate change and in the context of solar radiation modification, but what we have is a world with a warming climate. So we have different risks. We have a target risk. This is the risk where we want to act, the risk we want to address. And we also have countervailing risk. This is the additional risks that are produced in addressing the target risk, and not target risks that could be related to additional risks and co-benefits that could appear in the context of solar radiation modification. So I think I need to finish. This is the idea of how we need to work in this risk framework. We have these 4 boxes where we have the positive and negative effects of this technology. We can expect a reduction in climate extremes, for example, but we also have some risks and additional and new risks. And in this discussion, we should also include the potential co-benefits that could be related to solar radiation modification, for example, the reduction in tropospheric ozone, and also some novel or biophysical or social risks that came out under the implementation or the deployment of these technologies.
Thank you, Ines. Thank you very much. This was quite a useful introduction and overview. Thank you. We'll take questions at the end of this panel if we have time, but you are also free during the coffee break that will be afterwards to interact with the speakers. Okay. Thank you. So now I call on the stage Emma Rutkamp-Bloem, University of Pretoria, and she will, as I was saying before, give us an ethical framework to the program. Thank you, Emma. You have 15 minutes.
Thank you very much for having me, Amadeo, Director, Mario. This has been really wonderful. Pavia is a very wonderful city. So what I will do after I have figured out how to move the slides.
Voila. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. So I will reflect with you on climate action.
Is not in presentation mode. For
everyone.
Yes, sorry, let me. Yes. Is okay now, Georgia?
Yes, perfect. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, so we'll reflect on the very notion of climate action as an ethical issue. I will say a few words about what I think are 3 core pillars I want to suggest for an ethical framework for climate strategies. And these are intergenerational ethics, ecocentrism, proportionality, and then add a few words on distributive and epistemic justice. And then we will conclude very fast and figure out if this is a perfect or an imperfect ethical storm that we are facing. So reflecting on climate action implies reflecting on conflicting interests between regions and countries. And this is why this is an ethical reflection. We have to find a way to determine when one might consider an action to be ethically justified on a spectrum of risk analysis. So it's not just that we have this risk analysis that we have to make, it is to determine when we would be sufficiently ethically comfortable to make a decision. But of course, we know the spectrum is dynamic. It's unpredictable in many senses because of the nature and the status of climate actions, the options that we have available, and the nature of scientific knowledge. We have to consider allowing greater risk, maybe, the worse the situation becomes, and we might have to take decisions that are ultimately not morally tenable while engaging on ethical reflection. So what I want to do in this talk is to make a distinction between reflection on the ethics of considering climate action in the first case and the ethical, on the one hand, and then on the other hand, the ethical issues that arise from deploying climate engineering technologies, because these are at 2 different levels of conceptual thinking. So what I'm telling you about is what is the context within which we should be reflecting about the ethical issues that arise related to the deployment of the individual kinds of technology that we are considering. So what is this context, what is this atmosphere that we would, the mindset that we should have when we consider these individual concerns? So first on the list is intergenerational ethics or intergenerational justice. So the issue is, might be that I have skipped a slide. Yeah. So what, if anything, do current generations owe past and future generations? How do we determine what is owed? If we decide we do owe future generations something, how do we decide what it is that we owe? How do we know that our decisions are correct? Are current and past and future generations guided by the same moral considerations? And obviously not. How should we interpret the significance of past injustices in terms of what is owed to the descendants of the direct victims of the injustices?
So the three main questions then are, do we have a moral obligation to future generations at all? And if so, then what do we owe them? And here, considerations around precaution and reversibility will come in to help us figure out what it is that we owe them. How do we solve the power asymmetry problem? There is no direct reciprocity between contemporary and future generations. So there's no mutual cooperation and exchanges. But might there be shared benefits? Might it be the case that if we engage in thinking about future generations, that we are bequeathing shared benefits in some way? Because we will be determining the circumstances, the desires, the interests of future generations. How do we solve the problem in the third place of determining who will exist? Will there be future people at all? If yes, how many? And if yes, who will they be? What will their concerns be? What will be the world that they will be living in? I'm very bad with getting laptops to respond to me. The second pillar is ecocentrism. So the Western separation of humans from nature, the anthropocentric kind of approach, implies that climate actions are defined as actions that benefit humans without taking into account necessarily the broader impact on our planet. This seems counterintuitive in terms of climate strategies, because our existence and well-being are essentially dependent on a sustainable environment. And it's still human-centered. Non-Western approaches view humans and the environment as an interwoven unit, and therefore protecting the environment becomes integral to what it means to be human, to be called a person. So I want to just introduce two very broadly, very fast, two non-Western views to leave in your minds. So this is about a collectivist perspective on climate action, not individualist. First is Taoism, but we find much the same thinking in Buddhism. Nature is not simply a resource to be exploited by humans. Nature is not a service to humans. There should be this balance between humans, animals, and the universe that we should strive to attain. And there is this notion of no action, which points to humans not disturbing natural processes. In views from Africa, like Ubuntu, which broadly can be translated to humanists, the slogan for Ubuntu is a person through other persons. But these other persons actually can be interpreted as meaning or referring not just to humans, but also to non-humans and nature. And then the term actually becomes, we call the term ukama, which then becomes about relatedness and communion. So Ubuntu, as interpreted as ukama, refers to this interwoven pattern among the humans, non-humans, and the environment. And here we express these reflection on this notion through concepts such as solidarity, identity, and respect. So the idea is that no person is complete in themselves, but only is fully human, and as far as they remain a part of the web of life. So it becomes a condition for being a human being to confirm this. Then the third pillar is proportionality, which obviously implies that the action that we take have to take the balance between the objective, the means and methods to attain the objective and the outcomes into account. And obviously ethical reflection based on proportionality is risk-based. And then in terms of risk assessment, we all know in the context that we are talking of, there are all various factors that we have to take into account, the scaling, spatial scope, the delay between action and response, dynamic evolving information, the balance between likelihood, crisis, and the consequence of our actions. And of course, we know that climate risks are systemic risks. And so this is a really broad view on the more particular references that Inés gave you. And so, of course, we know that we have to take into account the uncertainty, the ambiguity, and we know that the effects will play out on this very broad field of political, economic, ecological, cultural, social levels. And that these risks, in a sense, are reflexive risks. These are self-imposed, self-induced risks. We did this to ourselves. And it makes it a little bit harder to deal with for some reason. So if it is a perfect storm, maybe a storm that can't be calmed. And like Gardner already said decades ago, that for the reason, because of the fact that this is a global phenomenon, because of these generational challenges, and because we have this issue of ascribing moral value to non-human entities such as nature, we simply cannot deal with the moral uncertainty that this issue poses. And it might then be, and Benham's talk that will follow mine will speak more to this, that we would not be able to find any compatible, justifiable moral decisions. That the decisions that we take will always be limited in some way, and that they will be in conflict with other decisions that we take on a moral level. And maybe that is okay, because maybe that's the best that we have. So maybe it's not a perfect storm. One suggestion that I want to make, two suggestions that I want to make, is that maybe rather than remain focused on the fact that we can't maybe solve this this moral uncertainty, that we use moral rules to decide how much scientific and technical knowledge is enough at a given time. And for that, I always go back to Kahneman and Tversky. We have to think fast and slow. So thinking fast means that we work with predetermined rules. And that has to do with intuition. It's like, you know, it's really not the right thing to do for me to start laughing now. So really, really simple-minded things. But thinking slow means we deliberate, and we think about, we take into account our intuition, we take into account our bias, and we take into account what they call loss aversion. So humans take decisions easier if they know what they can gain, and not so much what they will lose, which is very interesting. So I can't go into that, but I think it is really, this is a very useful tool that we might, in fact, go back to. And then the issues of distributive and epistemic justice. Understand that the way in which burdens and benefits are distributed impact on how different countries will react. And the very fact that if we ignore these kinds of distributive concerns might lead to epistemic injustice. So if you are at the receiving end of the burdens and not the benefits, you might be viewed for geopolitical reasons not to be a credible participant in the debate, because you don't partake in the benefits. And this is real from where I come from in my part of the world. We pay a very big price for what is happening. And then always find this evolving balance among ethical principles about proportion, reversibility, and future generations. If we're using moral rules and we think about justice, and we try and find an evolving balance, see ethics as a dynamic, ongoing conversation, and understand that there are limits, maybe we will find some kind of guidance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you very much. And now, after setting this ethical framework, we'll go through a normative uncertainty. This is another important aspect related with the climate engineering, the uncertainty of the rules, of the codes. And this is a perspective on a call for dynamic ethical assessment.
Sorry, I just wanted to point out that if there are any questions, I'm one of the co-authors because Benham couldn't make it, so I'm available. Just
Thank you. Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you very much. Can you see the screen? Yeah.
Hello. My name is Benham Baby, and I'm a professor of climate and energy ethics at Delft University in the Netherlands. First of all, thanks very much for the invitation to speak at this session, and apologies for not being able to attend the session live. I hope that this recording would be sufficient for the session too. This is a paper that we have co-authored with two colleagues from the university, Broletto and Benjamin Power, and Ben will be in the session and could also engage in the Q&A. You would very much like thoughts on the ideas presented. Climate engineering is receiving a lot of attention since the Royal Society's report in 2009, and since the observation that we might have to, in addition to mitigation and adaptation, consider large-scale interventions in the climatic system. It was called geoengineering back then, and it was defined as large-scale deliberate interventions in the Earth's climate system from the view that we might not be able to stay below what was called 2 degrees Celsius, later adjusted to 1.5 degrees Celsius, as compared to the pre-industrial level. Large technical intervention might be needed. The Royal Society report presented 2 categories of technologies, and those were radiation management, also solar radiation management, called SRM or RM, or the CDR or carbon dioxide removal. The first category deals with the consequences of climate change and manages or deals with some of the consequences of warming. And the second category deals with the origin of the problem or the emission of the greenhouse gases, and particularly CO2, and tries to get rid of CO2 one way or the other. For understandable reasons, both categories will becoming very controversial after being introduced in that report, because any kind of large-scale intervention in the climatic system would bring a lot of objections, including ethical objections. Yet, it's important and interesting to observe that CDR, or carbon dioxide removal, has become an integral part of mitigation policy, because it is considered very much necessary 15 years, give or take 15 years after the introduction of the technology in the Royal Society's report. If you look at the most recent IPCC report on mitigation, you see that CDR has been mentioned actually as an integral part of all scenarios in which we could stay below the 1.5 degrees Celsius as compared to the pre-industrial level. Of course, CDR comes back in options such as natural options for aspirations, but also what is called DEX, or using biotechnology with some kind of carbon capture and storage, using minerals or storage under the ground. So CDR has been called by now a mitigation strategy. So the rebranding happened, and solar geoengineering emerged as a new term. The CDR is being considered mitigation, and solar geoengineering or solar climate engineering, or the type of geoengineering that deals with radiation management. The radiation is becoming the one that is subject of a lot of ethical scrutiny. Indeed, benefits of solar radiation management will be substantial. Think about reduction of the pace of climate change, but also the pace of temperature rise and sea level rise. But at the same time, risks are substantial too. And they include important substantial issues such as ozone depletion, across a negative impact on health and agriculture, change in participation systems. And because of those risks, and because these risks are very controversial and very intricate, they are being abundantly discussed in the literature. What is interesting from an ethical point of view, as these risks are both transnational and intergenerational, and again, from an ethical analysis, they're becoming increasingly intricate because of these two aspects. Due to the aforementioned risks, a lot of ethical analysis categorically reject climate engineering, because how can we consider technologies of which we don't even know about the risk, or we are not aware about this risk? Another important argument against considering climate engineering is so-called moral hazard, along with the political inertia that would be created if we have a technological phase down the road. That would, as the argument goes, create some political inertia in dealing with the actual source of the problem and bringing the actual solution to the problem, and that would be mitigation of greenhouse gases. Since last year, there's been an international campaign by some scientists and practitioners arguing that perhaps we should consider a ban on doing any kind of solar radiation management practice, but also consider a ban on doing research. However, on the other side of the spectrum, there is also a call for research, perhaps most prominently in the National Academies of Reports published 2 years ago, in which there is a call for research on geoengineering or solar geoengineering to better understand the risks. There is also more recent movement as a response to the non-use agreements or the call for ban on research. It's called the call for balance, which is an open letter that calls for research because deliberation and governance would require us to do research and assessment. A ban is not going to help. We argue that thinking about the climate, ethics of climate engineering needs to be in terms of a risk versus risk framework, because climate engineering can help alleviate some irreversible climate change risks, but it can also cause serious and sometimes irreversible risks too. Yet it is risk versus risk that we need to compare, and we need to have an argument or a discussion about the ethical acceptability of different types of risks compared to each other. In doing so, we will run into a host of technical but also scientific uncertainties. But what is important to us for this presentation is that we will run into evolutionary normative uncertainties. Before I explain more about evolutionary normative uncertainties, first a general note and a taxonomy on normative uncertainties. In a paper together with some colleagues, a couple of colleagues from Delft and from Belgium, we have presented the first tentative taxonomy of normative uncertainty, of which evolutionary normative uncertainty are the most important one that will be discussed in the following on the following slides. But there are also other normative uncertainties, such as conceptual normative uncertainties and epistemic normative uncertainties. But in the interest of time for this presentation, let me focus on evolutionary normative uncertainties. When dealing with new technology, it could be unclear which moral norm would apply in the future to certain situations creating technological risk. There are two reasons for that, because the technology itself, but also the scientific knowledge associated with that technology will evolve. Of course, we keep looking for new information and experimenting with technology, and that might lead to important insights and pose by that important ethical questions. At the same time, morality and our understanding what is good in society will evolve. That is another aspect that we need to take into account, especially when you're dealing with considering technologies with very long lifetime, such as solar geoengineering. This approach builds on the notion of changing values as presented by the board, but also on the notion of technomoral change as earlier discussed in the literature. Due to evolutionary normative uncertainty, we cannot have a one-off ethical assessment of this technology. Hence, we call for a dynamic ethical assessment. Help us to re-evaluate the ethical acceptability of solar geoengineering in light of new insights. This would help us to better account for both scientific and technical uncertainties as well as unknowns, but also to better deal with societal uncertainties, including the problem of moral hazard and changing ethical beliefs. So the claim that there might be moral hazard as a result of considering technological options for doing research on solar geoengineering is a claim that could be empirically investigated and accounted for in such an approach to do a dynamic ethical assessment. Such dynamic longitudinal ethical assessment has certain benefits. First and foremost, it would help us to move beyond the yes-no statements as the current literature tends to actually argue for. And it would also help us to discriminate between different types of technology, because, for instance, marine cloud lighting, as I said, the type of solar geoengineering is a different technology than stratospheric aerosol injections or mimicking the volcanoes. So it's important to be able to distinguish and discriminate between those technologies in our ethical assessment. It will further bring the focus to the governance of research, because we can better anticipate consequences and building mechanisms to respond to those consequences. Of course, to the extent possible, but that would be an integral part of the approach. You could say that a dynamic ethics assessment could be considered as a form of belief revision on the basis of new factual evidence, but also on the basis of moral beliefs based on new moral experience or information. That is what we call a dynamic ethical assessment. And thank you for your attention. This research has been done within the consortium Ethics on Socially Disruptive Technologies. You can consult the website of the consortium, in which one of the research lines, nature line, does focus on climate. Any other question I would be happy to answer later via email or other connection lines, but of course, as I mentioned, co-author of the paper and the founder present in the session and can also answer questions. List of references in the presentation are included on the final slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think very, very interesting also this perspective. And as I said before, we take questions at the end of this panel. Okay, so if you have questions, please take a note, and we'll probably move to Benjamin. I invite Chris. Thank you, Chris, for coming on the stage. Chris Didio is a senior advisor of the AGU ethical framework. So I leave the floor to Chris. Chris, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Amedeo. Thank you, everybody, for welcoming me here. Just a word, I'm not part of the working group, but I've been invited to make your presentation on my research and on the American Geophysical Union, the ethical framework. So let's start with this. Is it okay? Yeah. So I will say a few words about, as I say, my research about geoengineering, and then also a few words about, about the AGU ethical framework that we're taking a lot of interest now with other initiatives in the same direction. But first, allow me just to introduce myself, because my professional background is maybe not what you call a classic. I'm an agronomic engineer, and I have 2 master's degrees in science, climate science, natural resources management, and I'm finishing a 3rd one in humanities and focusing on this research and on sustainable development. So this is done in the University of Lausanne. And I've been working for the last 25 years in around 100 countries with the Swiss government, with United Nations, with the World Bank on environmental health and environmental ethics. So I've been traveling quite a lot and working with national and international organizations. I'm also not so good with the computer, so I hope it's following me. So during these years, and I think it won't be a surprise for you, it's just that in my work, I've really witnessed a lot of climate change crises all around the world. And then what I saw from this experience is that climate change, as you know, has reached really every place in the planet, global north, global south, and including also outside national jurisdictions. And then what I've seen and what you see today is that climate change is really anthropogenic, it's real, and it's really dangerous. In parallel to this, and during my travels and for my research, I identified 4 anthropogenic threats to humanity. So first is the pandemics. We also saw the COVID that we just face now, environmental destruction, nuclearization, and global warming. And I've personally experienced these threats in Africa. I was working on the Ebola outbreak a couple of years ago. I lived 3 years in North Korea for the Swiss government, where it was in the middle of the nuclear arms race. We were also doing a lot of renewable energy projects there. Being in Bangladesh, where we witnessed this deforestation due to the influx of refugees from Myanmar. And then also in Switzerland, my own countries, I could witness the melting of the glaciers. So it's not a surprise that we can see now a bit in all over the world on the press, on the mainstream media, these announcements and this situation for climate change. But what might be more surprise is that there is more and more interest and consensus about climate intervention and climate engineering, talking about CDR, talking about SRM. this is the reason why I have started this research with University of Lausanne and looking at the environmental and geopolitical risks, but also benefits from potential SRM deployment in the coming decades or years. And for that, I try to adopt a very holistic approach, where the idea is also to look at the lesson learned from the past, where we had similar potential techno-fix solutions, such as what we have been using during the Green Revolution with machinery, with chemicals, with changing a bit the gender approach on techniques, but also the race to nuclear power. So these two things are quite important, and we find this quite a lot in the literature when we go back to solar engineering. We talk about that, so I'll go quite fast, but use the classification I've been using for both technologies. One is more nature-based for CDR, and one is more tech-based. And for SRM, which is also interesting for CDR, is more from where the technology could be implemented. So there is also the physical aspect of it. A lot of literature, as we've said, state of the art start to grow in both sides. And in my research, I had the chance to interview more than 100 scientists from all over the world, because the state of the art is very focused on global norms at this stage. But talking to other scientists, statisticians, and other decision makers about climate engineering shows that there's a real gap in this domain. So it was very interesting process that is still ongoing. Voila. So I try to touch some fundamental questions, but also practical questions about SRM deployment. So one could be obvious, but could SRM play a role, positive or negative, about the ongoing sixth extinction that we are living and that is driven by humans? And the question is that, as we have been discussing before, talking with ethicists like Steve Gardiner and others, could SRM detract us from the mitigation efforts of the greenhouse gas emissions in the first place? So this is a very practical question today. Maybe a bit further, you will see in the literature there is a lot of interesting future scenarios that they are politically relevant, and then they are showing like counter geoengineering, cocktail geoengineering, where we can see a mix of different potential deployments, CDR and SRM, but even together. And this is very interesting, because when we cross this with other literature, we can see what could have as an impact on the future of humanity. Total or partial destruction of our species. We were talking about the termination shock if we stop SRM, but also a barbarization of the world, where you have some few countries that take decision to do or not to do SRM, to bargain about the implementation or not of SRM, what will be the thermostat, we say. And hopefully the third one is how we could have a better future as one planet, if this is discussed and accepted or decided collectively. So these are really interesting, because there's a lot of interesting literature on this one. I don't go too much in detail here, but it is the very holistic view that we've been discussing, that I've heard also with former presentation. The relation with the rest of the Earth system, not only the climate one, but the 8 other ones. And as it has been said, there is potential impact on the ozone, there is potential impact on the water cycle, and this is something that will need a lot of research as well. What is the impact on the cascading tipping point that we are observing now? And finally, the relation, when we talk about sustainable development, with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Agenda 2030, and we see that there is an impact on it, positive sometimes, negative sometimes, of the cooling of the planet. This is also an approach that we were talking about, national and international deployment. So the national, the domestic laws, and the international laws, and to see whenever it's deployed, they will have a migration of the effect that sometimes, often, will go outside national jurisdiction. And at this stage, if we look at only the SRM part, we can see that it's still consistent with international law. That's why there is a need of this governance on this approach. When we deploy these 9, let's say, different technologies of SRM, we can see also that there are some that will be only deployed in the outer space, some in the atmosphere, some parts on national jurisdiction, sometimes outside. And after there is this part of SRM that is not very much discussed, is the one that is on the Earth system, on the Earth surface, that could be deployed in urban center. And sometimes are we still inside geoengineering or are we outside? And this is also a discussion that is interesting. So out of these environmental, socioeconomic, and geopolitical consideration, then we come to the ethical posture. So I will not repeat what has been said, but yes, what we use as engineers in the project, we always say doing the right thing and doing the things right. And this is very important because sometimes we can see that the debate is vice versa. It's the technique first before to think of it, what we want to achieve for the future generation and for ourselves. So here it was what you were mentioning before, the different posture. And what is interesting here is also to see, there was an interesting op-ed in the New York Times last week about also what is the real relation between discussion between the global north and global south. So sometimes it's a bit in a conflict way, but this is really a central discussion, because at the end of the day, whatever is your ethical posture from yourself or from a government, you could justify or not the deployment of geoengineering. It could be seen in both sides. That's why some of them say it's very difficult to govern. I don't go too much in these details. We've been discussing this. Maybe one thing is interesting is the corrective justice. We've been deciding on the last COP27, the loss and damage funds. What happened in the future if there is a deployment and these loss and damage funds could be also applicable to the consequence of SRM and how a state will be able to prove that what happened in India or in US or in Switzerland is the results of what has been deployed on the stratosphere or over the oceans. So this is key questions. I finished just this part of the research on 2 questions. So the first one is, could a successive SRM deployment comparable to a Pyrrhic victory, where the cooling the planet will have irreversible side effects? And the second one is, how can we be sure that powerful technologies will be used responsibly? Few words about AGU? Yes, thank you. So the second part of my work is for the American Geophysical Union that has started this ethical framework on ethical intervention research. So we start that with a white paper in June 22. And then we have run a couple of workshops, some of them of you that maybe you have participate, a summit. And then now we have published in our website the first draft of this ethical framework with 7 principles for commenting for the public. So it's open to all the public, and inside there is a growing member groups of ethicists, scientists that are working on it. And then we are going to be present in different events, small and large one, including in the COP27 we were present, COP28 this year. We are going to be in Bonn in June, and we go also on other workshops. Very important things to know is that AGU does not have a position about climate intervention research, but believes that an ethical framework is very necessary at this stage and in the situation of the absence of global governance. There is 7 principles you can see on the website. One of them is environmental justice, where we are starting to discuss with ethicians about the different angles, and after how we will implement and see this approach depending of CDR and SRM, more in specific aspect, because this is also needed. Yes, we are trying to listen to everybody. There is a large network, and then I invite you to go on the website, on the ethical framework, and you can comment it, and you are most welcome to join us. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. We have now time for some questions. I'm sure that our PhD students are here with many questions, but probably we can take just 3 of them. I ask you if you can also, who is remotely connected, if you can raise the hand. If you have question, here is Ines, Emma, Benjamin, and Chris to answer to your question, or maybe you can also have a chat during the coffee break in 5 minutes. So, questions? Don't be shy. Or even comments, yes, somebody was saying, even if you have comments, that's fine. If you want to add your perspective. Sorry? Okay. Yeah. There's a question from Benjamin. Yeah, Benjamin, you can talk. We can hear you.
Yes, thank you so much for all these presentations. Super interesting. I think my question relates to the first presenter when it comes to risk comparisons, right? So you mentioned the physical risks of climate change and also climate engineering technologies, and then the societal aspects of that. And it's something that I've been struggling with, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts. How would you say we can compare societal risks, right? Because especially when it comes to solar climate engineering, the issue is often that it is assumed to kind of have this lock-in process where we assume that SAI becomes a solution towards climate change, which is obviously is not. It can only be like a partial thing that we do. So how do you compare that to the societal risks of unabated climate change, for example? Like, do you have any ideas on that? I'd be super curious. Thank you.
Yeah, Ines. You can talk from there. We have also the camera.
Okay. Thank you, Benjamin, for the question. It's not so easy to implement this framework, but it's a starting point for the discussion. The first thing we need is to gather all the information we have around about the potential risks of the different technologies of solar radiation modification, and this is to do this we need a lot of disciplines involved in this work. But the idea of my presentation is in some way to set the scene of how we can start the discussion to make informed decisions related to the potential deployment or not of this technology. But we need the variety of disciplines working in this and to gather the information that is already available, and also we need more research related to this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ines. Other questions? Marco? From yeah. I have just a comment. Thanks. I have a comment that is related with what Ines was just saying about the informed decisions that can be taken whether to implement or not for these engineering solutions. Okay, from my point of view, I'm a physicist, I'm a climate physicist. So this is just a comment on the fact that the models that we use, climate models that we use for making climate predictions and climate projections are still, they can represent very well like the climate response to the increase in greenhouse gases, but they are still affected by large uncertainties, and especially related to, for instance, the role of aerosols and clouds, and the interaction between aerosols, clouds, and radiation. So my question is, my comment is that this limitation, how these limitations in the climate modeling, the modeling of possible climate responses to geoengineering
solutions are taken into account. Because my impression is that, I mean, I have a knowledge about climate models that specifically for like atmosphere, not much about the stratosphere, because what I know, what I can add here to the discussion is that we still need to increase the knowledge of such processes that are not perfectly, not well understood yet. And this is something that I believe that should be taken into account before to start the debate about the ethics of behind the decision of implementing these solutions.
All comments. I am a climate scientist too. And what we are doing is we're using climate models, the same global climate models we use to produce the climate projections. They include the stratosphere and the interactions. And this is why we are using the information to reproduce the effect of volcanic eruptions, because this is the way we can check that the models are working well at least. So this is the starting point. We use the climate models, we have simulations, and we compare with volcanic eruptions. So this is what we are doing. And in that sense, models that are using different scenarios of strategies of stratospheric aerosol injections are working really well to reproduce observed time.
Thank you. Was a question here? And so present yourself when you make questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm Diego. I'm a student of the PhD. So my first comment is about we have to, it's really important your work, because for me, we have to understand as society that the unintended consequence is, we cannot predict 100% the things. So the best way, even it's more if we speak about climate, because it's a complex system. So we have always, it's better this position that understand the risk and try to create plans to solve, to I don't know the word, but to confront this possible unintended consequence, because it will happen. I can say many technologies, many examples about this unintended consequence in all the fields. But my question is probably for first one for Chris, that in the experience of your research, which will be the main barriers to accept this probably negativity or this unintended consequence for decision makers? Because in my experience, we know that more the people who are taking decisions and maybe the society, as Emma said, that we are always taking the decisions about what things we will gain, and no, we don't want to hear about negativity or the consequence. So what will be the main barriers in your experience for this global south to accept these implications? And probably how the ethics could help to the society to accept or to understand that every decision have a consequence. So, thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think first, what our colleague said before, we need to live with uncertainties, because even for our own life, we have to accept that and accept that we have this potential of having a resilience. So this, if you go the bottom up to the decision maker, it needs to be, let's say, faced by every level, including for those decision makers for the geoengineering. So the barrier, I think, if you look between global north and global south, is time. That's a crucial one, because there is a need of a lot of time that
different ethics and different positions will be aligned to take a common decision. And this time today is the pressure that we have with climate change, with the pressure that this decision maker, not only now in Pakistan, in India, or in places in Africa, is starting to be a reality in every country in the world. But we are not, as far as what I've seen in my career as an engineer working in renewable energy and climate around the world, and now doing this research, we are not talking about the same topic because it needs to have more time for the academic to go for the research, for the ethics to be aligned, and time is the real problem today.
Thank you, Chris. We have time for the last question. Hiba, present yourself, introduce yourself.
CU number 6, I'm a marine biologist. And actually, I was interested in the presentation of Ines. There was something very intriguing when you quoted the report of the SRI is the only solution. And it was very intriguing how considering the normative uncertainty, what was the switch point from SRM as a potential solution to the only solution? Was it time? Was it like near term, long term? How did it become the only solution? And why is it considered like a priority right now? So thank you.
Ines.
Report was the result of a discussion of an expert panel, mostly climate scientists, to address what we know about solar radiation modification. And this is what we have from results from climate simulations. That is the only technology considered very kind of simulation, the only technology that at global scale will cool the planet in a rapid way, in a fast way. But this is the result from the information they have from the variety of climate simulations and from the knowledge of how the climate works.
Okay, thank you, Ines. So we are surprisingly perfectly on time. So now we have a coffee break downstairs. So please, you can move downstairs. Come back here on time at 11:30. We'll start sharp. Okay, so please. Thank you.
With my family, a rare thing these days. So I really didn't want to interrupt that for 2 days to come to you, unfortunately. But still, my family, a rare thing these days. So I really didn't want to interrupt that for 2 days to come to you, unfortunately. But still, I'm happy that I can say a few words about the question why ethics is still missing in the discussion about geoengineering, about climate engineering. Missing is maybe a big word, of course, people are addressing it as we are doing, but in the global discussion, it does not have the big role it, for instance, has at the moment regarding artificial intelligence. Why is that? I think the main reason is that geoengineering requires new ethical concepts, new ethical frameworks. It's somehow a disruptive technology, you could say, in an ethical sense. And that's what I would like to explore in these few minutes of my talk. Maybe first of all, by discussing the theme of the Anthropocene. A big word maybe nowadays, but I believe that what we have come to see over the past decade or so maybe, and of course it started already earlier, is that not only technology is part of the condition of the human being, but also the earth is part of this. We live in an age in which we are also intervening in that planet system to such a scale that we start to experience the condition of our lives that we've often overlooked, just like technology has often been taken for granted somehow and definitely not be seen as part of what makes us human. So expanding the philosophy of technology towards the Anthropocene has a lot of implications. My own angle within the philosophy of technology always tries to address the phenomenon of technological mediation, the way in which technologies are mediators, you could say, between human beings and the world in which they live. where typically people used to locate technologies in the realm of the world, but where the approach that we have been developing over the past decades tries to locate technology not in the world of objects opposed to the human subject, but in the relation between humans and the world, where you can then try to investigate how technologies help to shape how human beings are in their world through acting, practices, and also how the world can be there for us, how we perceive the world and make sense of the world. Now, in that approach, we have focused for a long time on technology. What do technologies do in these relations? How can we conceptualize the role of technologies in human-world interactions? What we've now come to discover is that that concept of the world, of course, might be a bit too shallow to address the themes that are at stake at the moment. It's not only the world of our everyday objects, of other people, animals that we live in, it's the earth out of which a world is made, and the earth that forms somehow a planet on which we live in a global culture where we also need global frameworks. So expanding the concept of world towards these other three concepts might be a first step that we need to address what is really at stake. Now, if you follow that same scheme of perception and action, you can say that these new technologies that we have and that we are writing our report on are also both in those lines. And we can observe the earth in new ways, but also intervene in the earth in new ways. We can act through geoengineering, through climate engineering, and of course, there's earth observation technologies that help us to understand how the ecosystems on the planet Earth function. What is more, this results in some kind of a dynamics in which you could say we need to learn to deal with these technologies and they also do something to us. And you can say, first of all, humans develop a relation to these new technologies to intervene, to observe. They need to appropriate them, to understand them, to make them their own, as it were. Then, of course, these technologies visualize the Earth, make visible what the Earth is. But in doing so, they also show some kind of a vulnerability of the Earth, which makes the Earth somehow, you could say, politically relevant. And that makes the technology actually a tool to take responsibility, where human beings get responsibilized, you could say. So there's a whole dynamics in which these technologies are not just neutral tools, but they do something to our relation to the Earth. What you could also say is that we could expand an old concept in phenomenology, the concept of the chiasm, towards human-Earth relations. The chiasm was developed by Merleau-Ponty to typically describe interpersonal relations, where the main observation is that as soon as somebody perceives another person, you're always both there as a perceiver and a perceived person, and the other person as well. So the connection between the two is on the line, it's a chi. So kind of, what you see here. The same thing you can say is true for the Earth. We perceive the Earth, but in a sense, the Earth perceives us as well, notices us, notices our presence there. That's what the whole Anthropocene concept tries to express. We live in an era in which we change the Earth and in which human interventions leave trails, you could say, on the Earth. So humans are perceiving, but also perceived. Humans are vulnerable, but also threatening, and the Earth is also vulnerable, but in a sense also somehow threatening us, which is also, I would say, a new way of thinking about the Earth. And we need concepts to think about the Earth that we typically use to reserve for humans only. The planet itself maybe is also something ethically new. Every astronaut that comes back from space tells about this almost mystical experience of seeing the dark, cold space, and then there's only this one blue marble, as they call it, the Earth, where there's life because of the atmosphere. For a long time, this has been analyzed as a form of alienation. Earth is our condition, that's where we belong, we should not leave the Earth. But now it has also become a condition for ethical experience. This is a moral experience, you could say, to see the vulnerability of the Earth. So the Earth becomes a planet that we can actually care for. Now, as soon as we start to intervene in these ecosystems, in the system of the planet Earth, of course, that requires ethical concepts that are also probably new. You could say that the existing concepts with which we normally do ethics, need to be expanded or rethought, re-engineered, as some people even say, in the light of geoengineering. For instance, what is nature still if we can interfere in the planet, in the ecosystem? An important concept in environmental ethics has always been the intrinsic value of nature. But what is still intrinsic nature if nature itself becomes design, becomes an artifact? Now, of course, technologies like dimming the sun, they bring a risk, because is it a reversible technology? Well, we've been discussing this a lot in our report. And when is the risk justifiable? How can you define the justifiability of a risk? Who is at stake then? Should we only discuss people who live now on the planet Earth or future generations? Should we expand our moral scope also towards the non-human entities, ecosystems at large? And also, to take responsibility, we need to have control. But what does the concept of control mean here? Because we need to build on models that never give certainty, that give some kind of a reliable kind of prediction somehow, but we cannot see this as we intervene and then we have the effect that we want. So how can we then still think the notion of control and the notion of moral responsibility? Then the moral rights that are involved, whose rights should we take into account? As I already said, people who live now, people who live in the future, ecosystems. How should we rethink the concept of a moral right here? And then a democracy. Who is to decide about this? Should we also include the voices of future generations in our current democratic decision making? How should we do democracy at this huge and large scale? I think these are big questions, and that also shows that we need to expand our scope from the Earth, the planet, to the a globe. We need a global ethics. That's why I think UNESCO is the place to raise questions like this. And that we also need an intercultural perspective on ethics to address all these stakeholders, all the frameworks, all the normative backgrounds that we could use to reach some kind of a global agreement on what would be an acceptable way to interfere in the planet Earth. I really hope that our report will be a start of that it will invite member states to have this debate, and it will be the beginning of a longer debate, because I'm afraid we will need this in the near future. I really doubt that governments in the world will make the steps that we really need to counter the warming of the Earth. And if that's the case, we might indeed need to go to technologies that we have on the table now, and then we better do this in a responsible way. I wish you a very fruitful meeting. And hope to see you all soon. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, and treaties are contracts between states. Okay, 2 states is the minimum, but we can have also multilateral treaties. And the Paris Agreement is a treaty, okay? And as all the contracts in our experience can be respected or not respected, can be conceived in a way that if somebody does not respect the contract and the obligations, there is some bad consequence or not. And this is the case again of the Paris Agreement, because there is no real system of sanctions for people and countries that do not respect it. And then we have also why it does not work. Okay, everybody, what should I do in order? One system is there. Okay. Then we have also another kind of treaties that are regional treaties, okay? It's possible that in a region, intended region like the Europe, the Africa, or the Asia and other local treaties. But we have mostly national laws. And national laws, the way lawyers and even people, not only lawyers, think about the global organization of the human community, let's say, okay, we have the states, and then we have some level of international cooperation. All the organization of the United Nations is based on nation states, and on the principle of inviolability of the territory of each state. Okay, and so we have national laws, and then we have also, oh, this is a strange object, transnational law. Oh, wow. What is the difference between, this is a typical question I put to my students, what is the difference between international law and transnational law? Transnational law is something that happens without the authorization of the head of the countries. When some concepts, some legal concepts, ideas, instruments go through the boundaries of the states. Okay, it's very new point of view and very interesting, because this gives us the idea that it's possible to do something even though our governments do not respect their obligation. Then we have also subnational entities, okay? So regions, different states in federations, for instance, United States, okay? They are a group of states. Texas recently enacted a law asking to separate from the Federation of the United States. They want to be a law, okay? Just to give the idea. But we have also at a lower level municipalities. We have local communities and small entities. And we have also private entities like citizens. Citizens, communities, corporations, associations, and more. Any kind of organization for profit or not profit. Okay, all these is what we need and what we include in the definition of multi-level governance. In the IPCC document, International Panel for Climate Change, they stress several times the importance of multi-level governance. Multi-level governance means that all these levels should hopefully work together. So we had a very nice experience in this sense. The experience of the region around the city of Milan. And they have promoted the realization of a project that is called sponge. Sponge is something that absorbs water and release. And so Milan is a place where sometimes in the year you have plenty of water, too much. We have flood in the city, okay? And other moment of drought, okay? And so the concept is to retain the water and release it at the moment. What is interesting is that this project is funded by the European Union, approved by the Italian government, approved by the region of Lombardia, and then approved by all the municipalities, even the smallest one in the area. And the organizer of this are today, I invited the person of this project to make a short presentation on the project, though it's not possible because we have to go into school. We have programmed an intervention in the school. So this is important for something that I say just in 2 minutes. This is a nice representation of what is the stratification of different levels of laws and regulations and so on. And this is a description only for Europe, but you can make the same exercise for every part of the world. Okay, we have in Europe, you can be member of the European Union, but not of the Schengen area, or not of Europe, or yes and not, and so on. It's a crazy. So this is the reason why the rule of lawyers and jurists that in the past was very boring. When I was at university, I was unsatisfied of this. I preferred sailing. But now it's fantastic because in this mess, a lot of things can happen. Okay, and also the experience I have just told you of the area of that and the role of citizens. Because do not forget that law is for citizens and not citizens for law. And this is a nice study of a university, English university, about the global trends in climate change litigation. Citizens become more active. Citizens bring to the court their own government. Your government, my government, you have signed some treaties, international agreement. You have assumed some obligations. Oh, there is no sanction. Okay, but this is a violation of human rights, for instance. And human rights are recognized in other international instruments. And so have a look at this. This is the trend of the number of lawsuits proposed by citizens for climate change. Some of them are successful, others not, but this is not the problem. What is interesting is that citizens can be active in this story. And citizens and political bodies should be, this is the end of the story, should be informed about scientific developments and result of scientific research. This is a basic point. Knowledge has to be shared because knowledge is the only way against prejudice, against ignorance, against decisions taken for unreasonable fears and so on. And so this is, I like this article of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. The citizens, everyone has the right to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress and its application. That this means that we have to know what scientists are doing and in which prospect and so on. And I thank you. We have Julia Schubert. Julia Schubert is a member of the COMEST and she's a sociologist. And we go on in this exhibition of different point of view and backgrounds and how long I can start with a story when I was a boy. Okay. So, talking about scientific knowledge, the title of your presentation is The Role of Scientific Expertise for Policy Making. So, she makes a bridge between scientific knowledge and political decision. When I was a boy.
What does full screen mean? We both don't speak Italian. The full screen, which one do you have to click?
No. It's getting this.
Thanks. Okay, click on the arrows. Okay. Okay, yeah, thank you, Amadeo, for having us here. It's been a really interesting couple of days. Yeah, I want to talk about the role, or rather the different actually roles of scientific expertise for policymaking. And I want to begin by suggesting why this question of scientific expertise and research in general in this context of climate engineering is not only very relevant, but also really, really tricky. So the challenge, I think, which has become clear in the previous presentations already with this current debate over climate engineering is that it sometimes seems to be about all and nothing at the same time. So also going back to the Royal Society definition here, climate engineering concerns the deliberate large-scale intervention in the Earth's climate system in order to moderate global warming. So on the one hand, we can see, the the debate is really about quite a lot and quite big questions. It raises the question of how to address a really big and fundamental global issue, how we want to live together on this planet, how we want to decide to tackle this issue, and so forth. And so it raises a lot of fundamental questions, and I think a necessarily, in a sense, controversial and politicized debate, because these are normative questions. Because of these really fundamental questions, I think particularly during the last year or last couple of years, there's a legitimate and growing call to regulate, right? We want to know what's going on in this sphere. We hear about the different kinds of experiments by private actors. And so this has confronted policymakers with the challenge to figure out what it is that they're supposed to govern here. And it's a challenge because climate engineering does not exist yet. There are currently no established means to cool the earth or to dim the sun by drawing huge amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere, as Ines said, at scale. And also the SRM research is mostly based on modeling research, so we really need to know a lot more. So climate engineering in this sense is an emerging technology. It's a technology that we are currently making. And this is why actually right now the spotlight at this moment about the debate has really focused on research. So right now, I think necessarily, but also quite trickily, the debate over climate engineering is a debate where we have basic research questions charged and in a sense supercharged or loaded with these really big fundamental ethical questions. And as we have heard today a couple of times, this debate in the past months had really become very polarized. I think there's at least 3 different calls for and against research on these measures right now, especially in climate engineering. And so the one side suggests essentially we need to know much more to even begin being able to inform a meaningful, really decision-making process on these measures. It's so abstract at the moment. We just really don't know what these technologies would even look like. The other side even calls for a non-use agreement and, says it's really dangerous to even look into this. More research might provide a slippery slope. So we have to be really careful. And I think both sides, in a sense, have really reasonable arguments. Yeah, if you look into it, I think their positions are both meaningful, but at the same time hardly reconcilable. Right? We can't make sense of them at the same time. So the question that I want to address today is what to do with this, how to move past this kind of polarization, and how to foster a productive debate about how governing this research and decision-making process could look like. And the main point that I want to make today is that I think taking a productive approach to governance requires considering a bit more thoroughly the different ways actually in which scientific expertise is entangled with and shapes political decision-making, but essentially society at large. I mean, Peter Paul has already suggested this entanglement between research technologies and then the world that we live in. What I want to do today is disentangle a little bit the different lines of arguments that we find in the current debate and draw your attention to the different ways in which research is expected to inform policymaking in them, and then hopefully suggest some productive interventions for governance. So one argument that we have heard today, I think as well, is that, and I think it's been pursued by both policymakers and very prominent climate scientists as well, is we need more research to provide an evidence base on these measures. The way I think in which science is expected to inform politics here is pretty straightforward. It's expected to settle matters of fact and inform a technical decision-making process. So at the moment, I think most importantly, it serves to determine if solar geoengineering would even work and how this would look like. So
what happens if we inject aerosols into the stratosphere? How would we even go about doing this? What kinds of material infrastructure would, allow us to do this? Would the particles behave as the models suggest they actually do? How would we know? I mean, what kind of monitoring infrastructure and observational kinds of basic research would we need to even determine the effects of this and so forth? So by providing answers to these questions, research is expected to reduce fundamental uncertainties and provide essentially the substance upon which then a policy process and a political decision-making process can be based. So what's also relevant, I think, to highlight in this context is research and decision-making, deployment, politics is independent to some extent in this model, because arguing for the need of research, as we have heard a lot today, does not imply arguing for the need of deployment. So it really is seen, to be a separate context. I now want to go about complicating this very reasonable argument a little bit by drawing on science studies and sociology of science studies insights. Begin by just saying that, of course, this idea that scientific research provides important insights for especially complex technical decisions is, of course, perfectly reasonable. I mean, we would all hope that decision makers do actually inform themselves before they take a decision. But the problem with this position at the same time is that, as I suggested in the beginning, climate engineering does not exist without the research that we're doing on it. It sounds a bit abstract, but the point is basically climate engineering is not a given thing that's out in the world and that we have discovered and now we have to learn more about it to know how to treat it, but it's something that we have and that we continue to create, right? And this creation process or this making process is precisely dependent and shaped by the kinds of research that we decide to fund and support. And so a rich and very, I think, heterogeneous body of work, so it's not just one line of argument, but a rich and heterogeneous body of work has importantly complicated this picture of science serving as an evidence base for politics. And I just want to really briefly highlight 2 or 3, depending on time, insights, and then see and explore with you what this might mean for governing research. So one important insight and one line of argument builds on the notion of de facto governance. And what scholars have suggested in this context essentially is that in the absence of other forms of governance, research essentially performs a governing function. So it's a bit self-explanatory. So focusing on scientific assessments does not postpone political engagement with these measures, but it is itself a kind of a form of governance by then scientific facts. So the key issue, I think, here is that de facto governance implies a form of governance that is at work despite being unacknowledged and unrecognized at seeking to govern. So you think, you just support research and they're supposed to find out the facts, but by funding, you have to still decide what kind of research to fund. And so by funding research, you already engage in a form of de facto governance. And the problem is that this kind of governance and obviously is not consciously or deliberately or democratically developed by people based on meaningful principles to people around the globe, but it happens as a side effect of particularly pressing scientific questions or scientifically interesting questions. And so the literature in this context has been particularly concerned about a kind of narrowing of the debate and focus on primarily physical risk and technical questions at the expense of more, the complex social, ethical, moral, normative kinds of questions that we have been dealing with today. A second line of inquiry that I want to briefly touch on or highlight here has complemented these insights by focusing on different kinds of research that are currently conducted on climate engineering. So So essentially what they are saying is that different kinds of methodological approaches to the question at hand do foreground different kinds of risks, and aspects and dimensions that we need to concerns, potentials of climate engineering that we need to take into account. So basically by choosing different kinds of perspectives, we again shape the kind of technology that we receive. And so just to give you one example, I think that a couple of presentations have focused on today already. The literature has highlighted how, for example, this very sudden rise of the negative emissions technologies, and particularly the BECS technologies that followed the IPCC assessment reports, has to some extent and in quite important extents been a result of modeling practice. So this policy option was, in a sense, produced by the assumptions that, are built into the model. So it was not driven by some spectacular scientific breakthrough that kind of showed, that we can now deploy these measures at scale, but it was actually included in the models that were trying to model different emission pathways. And so, following Wim Carton's diagnosis in this context, this introduction of the negative emission technologies is, I quote, first and foremost not a biophysical, but an economic necessity given by the character of the models themselves. So whether we accept the inevitability of negative emissions at scale, at least, is entirely contingent on whether we subscribe to the economic assumptions that are built into the models and that they extend from. So again, research in the sense doesn't just neutrally assess different options, but it actively frames the necessity, the desirability, the viability, and so forth of different options that we have. I'm going to skip this one and then come to the end. So what do these perspectives imply for governing research? Does this now mean, to exaggerate a little, that we have to halt our research until we have globally agreed on a meaningful framework? Does it mean we have to ban modeling research because it's, producing really dangerous insights? The answer, of course, I think at least is no. But my point of exaggerating is I think we need to find, in a way, a bit of a better connection between the basic research and these big kinds of discussion. I think, first of all, these perspectives suggest that research cannot come before governance, and this has been emphasized a lot today. The two really need to go hand in hand. And then the question, I think everyone would agree on this, but the question is how to devise such a framework. I mean, how to decide what kind of governance we need. And just to make one last point, I think that in response to this challenge of coming up with a meaningful governance framework, this governance of climate engineering implies governing how we want to define, problematize, and tackle this issue of climate change. And building on what Emma said, I think we need, in a way, to develop richer perspectives, more positive perspectives of what can be gained with different kinds of technologies, right? Not putting everything into one basket and then saying, this is a techno fix and we don't need it, but also not saying, this is the only solution. So looking at kind of what can the different types of technologies do to address the different and really fundamentally different kinds of problems that people around the world are faced with due to climate change, because climate change is also not one issue for everyone. Yeah, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. Very good presentation. What is interesting is that Julia introduced the point of uncertainty and not uncertainty, but the idea that climate engineering does not exist. It is something that we create. But I can object that it is true for climate engineering, but it's also true for the level of accumulation of greenhouses in the atmosphere. Okay, we do not know, and are creating the problem. So the curve that Ines presented, when you're ready, I stop. Yeah. Yes, but this is just to make a bridge with the PowerPoint. My friend Sam book, and that is about doing and not doing.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I really want to express my gratitude for my host, Amadeo, of course, but all the other the hosting institutions staff and PhD students who gave us really interesting responses, and I really enjoyed the time. Actually, this is my second time in Pavia. I was here about 25 years ago when I was a PhD student at the London School of Economics, and at that time I didn't have any time to experience in this more comfortable way. So I do really appreciate it. Thank you. Actually, this title and the topic was given by our host, Amadeo, because we need to emphasize this topic, and I agree. So that's why I'm going to do this. And what I want to say is we need to compare. This is very much what we learned from our previous speakers. When we consider our ethical attitude and what kind of climate action we should take, we have to be balanced in the sense that we have to consider cost of doing certain climate engineering as well as cost of not doing climate engineering. Of course, it's still controversial. If you look at the literature, they agree on this point while saying that if you consider that comparison, then advocate of climate engineering says it's actually doing climate engineering is less evil, and the critique says actually not doing climate engineering is less evil. So, it doesn't solve the problem, but actually that's the right way of going into. I want to build on the UNESCO's efforts on climate action. Actually, it is really important document on climate action by UNESCO in 2017. We have a declaration of ethical principles of climate change, and they have a 6 guiding ethical principles, and you have a prevention of harm and precautionary approach, equity and justice, and sustainable development, and solidarity and scientific knowledge. And it's very clear that what these ethical principles are trying to achieve. But what we have to say is, because this is an ethical framework which gives us kind of guiding principles, if you want to make a specific decision or whether you should take a certain climate action or not, we need to a little bit more than these guiding principles. So that's what the COMEST members are trying to do in our forthcoming report on the climate engineering. Okay. Before I move to the details, I want to just raise several methodological issues. First one is the problem of trade-offs. So you saw these 6 ethical principles. At the value levels, there is no conflict. I mean, they are all really valuable the goals we need to achieve through our climate action. But if you want to make a specific climate action decision, you will find that it's almost impossible to achieve all 6 goals by doing one particular action. So you need to have some trade-offs, but we don't have any clear algorithm or even the very wide consensus on how to deal with these trade-offs. And secondly, we have a problem of vagueness. For instance, precautionary principle is really widely accepted principle. You have to be precautionary with respect to what you are doing. But you have to ask this question: how exactly precautionary you have to be? I mean, there are many different ways of precautionary toward the climate action, and you have to pick up one particular climate action as the most precautionary action, and this is difficult. And thirdly, there's a problem of epistemic uncertainty. We actually heard about this epistemic uncertainty so many times in this conference. I will just say a little bit more about this epistemic uncertainty in the sense that there is several levels of uncertainties. If you want to have a climate action based on one particular climate engineering, you have to start with a scientific research about the basic mechanism of that engineering action. But then that understanding of the mechanism has to be translated into the engineering solution, which has to be tested on a small scale in the wild environment. Then you have to apply that, scaled up action. In each transition, there is an epistemic uncertainty. So it's really difficult to cover all this uncertainty in a very consistent way. Okay, given that methodological issue, we should consider cost of doing climate engineering and not doing climate engineering. And there is a broad consensus on the existence of various risks of climate engineering. So nobody, even the very strong advocate of climate engineering, didn't deny this risk. But there is a huge difference in opinion about how much risk climate engineering has and what should we do with respect to this climate engineering. First, on this cost of doing climate engineering, there's a risk of irrecoverable or irreversible actions. So when you think that the one particular engineering method is promising and you do this, but it turned out because of epistemic uncertainty, it has a huge harm to the human race. What should we do? So we would naturally would like to go back to the original position, but many climate engineering, if it is very disastrous, is not recoverable. So there is a clear cost of this irreversible action. And there is a risk of violating major ethical principles. I mean, this is very clear with respect to the justice principles. Justice means at least equity in terms of benefits and harm, but because of the certain engineering characteristics of climate engineering, even when the climate engineering is successful, the benefits and the harm may not be equally distributed over the many nations or many people in the world. And so it raises various justice considerations. And there is a risk of almost impossible task of ethical and effective governance. We already heard from Julia that the governance issues are really prominent in the case of climate action. But we have these national sovereignty issues, and we have these justice issues. So even when everybody agrees that the one particular climate engineering is the best option to take from purely academic point of view, you still have a really difficult task of coordinating your climate action across the national boundaries, across the various interest groups, and while respecting all the ethical principles. So this is a really difficult task. And let's move to the cost of not doing climate engineering. I mean, the first cost we can think of is, of course, the loss of opportunity. When you have one or different promising options to take, it's okay. You don't need to take this very risky climate engineering. But if you do not have any visible climate actions which can reproduce the potential benefits of climate engineering, it's very difficult to say, oh, I don't want any risk at all. I mean, it's a really difficult situation. So that's the first cost. And second cost is a loss of opportunity to test external validity. As I said before, we have to know, even before we actually take the final decision of globally applying, globally deploying climate engineering, we have to know whether it's a viable option. But in order to know that, you have to do at least at the very last level. You have to have a small scale engineering experiment in the wild situation. And if you do not make that step, then even when you decide, okay, let's go for climate engineering, you cannot really do this. So that's a second loss. And third loss is loss of opportunity to do less evil. But as I said before, it really depends on which side you are talking to with respect to climate change. Okay, so final comments. I think there is a wide consensus among the speakers of this conference, which is maybe each speaker has a slightly different point of view about the ethical status of climate engineering. But I think it's safe to say that we all agree that immediate action with respect to ethical principles and governance is needed because we know that we are in the emergent situation. Climate doesn't wait for us to have enough time to consider whether this option is right or whether this option is right. I mean, the temperature is rising continuously. And we know that, unfortunately, there are significant disagreement among even experts on their view of climate engineering. But given this situation, I think it's safe to say that we need to start very quickly the wide interdisciplinary discussions about ethical principles, as I said, and the governance issues that Julia said, and we need to connect those kind of discussions with the viable climate action, and that's what we can achieve through what I want to suggest, the civilian pressure over the government. Grazie.
Thank you for your considerations and also for being perfectly touched. I was ready with 3 minutes. Thank you. And now we have Sandro Fuzzi. Sandro, thank you for coming. And Sandro has an experience of participating in the IPCC, the group of national experts on climate change, and he can give us the opportunity to have a look inside the discussion they had on this issue. Click the public floor.
Yes, thank you, everybody. I want to thank Amedeo for inviting me. I'm not familiar with the community that is discussing this issue in these days. So I've learned a lot from the presentation before. At the same time, I understand that I am the last obstacle between you and lunch. So I'll try to be short, also because a lot has been said already. So you have already some background. So at the end of March, so less than 2 months ago, the synthesis of the 6th assessment report was presented. This action, just to give you an impression of how big is this issue, it lasted for 6 years. And it includes the 3 volumes. The first one on the science basis of climate change, the second one on impact and adaptation, and the third one on the mitigation. And in addition, in the meantime, also 3 special reports were produced. So we are talking about 10,000 pages, just to give you an idea. So I just want to briefly highlight some of the key aspects of climate change. It's unequivocal now that human activities are warming the planet. The fact that global emissions have continued to increase even after the Paris Agreement. The human-caused climate change is already affecting the weather in all regions of the world. You see in this picture where hot streams, heavy precipitation, and droughts are represented. So in all regions for which we have enough data to examine, there is an increase of these three problems. So to limit human-caused global warming to 1.5 degrees requires deep, rapid, and sustained emission reduction. And you see in the picture the different possible scenarios. And what we have in front of us is quite difficult, because we can allow only 500 gigatons of CO2 emission from now to the end of the century for remaining with a 50% likelihood within the 1.5 degree limit. With the current emission, this will take less than 10 years. So no way that we can reach this limit to the end of the century, and even for the 2 degrees threshold, we have less than 20 years. So something must be done. So the carbon dioxide removal is something that now there is a practically general agreement in the science community that CDR is needed in addition to the emission reduction. So CDR has through roles. So to lower the net CO2 or greenhouse gas emissions in the near term, to counterbalance the so-called hard-to-abate emissions, and to achieve net negative emissions. So this technique is presently an option to reduce emissions from large-scale fossil fuel-based energy and industrial sources. The CCS injection is a mature technology for the gas processing and to enhance the oil recovery. but is less mature in the power sector and in cement and chemical production, where is expected to play a major role. There is no problem in storing capacity because around the world there are plenty of geological places where the CO2 could be stored. And if the storage place is appropriately selected and maintained, this CO2 can be permanently isolated from the atmosphere. What we have already heard is that CCS is currently facing technological, economic, environmental, and sociocultural barriers, but it is something that for which there is a consensus in the scientific community that must be put in place. A more difficult issue is the direct air carbon capture and storage. So taking the CO2 that has already been emitted in the atmosphere in the past and store it in geological reservoirs. So we know that CO2 concentration is practically equal all around the world. So there is no problem of finding the storing place because anywhere is good enough. But there are only very few small-scale demonstrators that the DAX technology can work, mainly because of the difference in concentration. To start with, when you capture air from a chimney, thousand or tens of thousands ppm is very different than when you try to capture it from the air, where the concentration is slightly above 400 ppm. So compared to the other CDR measurement, the primary barrier is that is not possible to use the technology that are already in use for the normal, let's say, CCS. So for these, there is urgently a need of research to study new methodologies that can minimize the land use and energy consumption. So there is a warning. Any CDR technique should not be seen as an alternative to greenhouse gas reduction. So it's something that it's in addition, but we cannot, as unfortunately some political people in some countries, including mine, are seeing CDR as an alternative of greenhouse gas emission reduction. The other point, which is very important, is that humanity has never removed an atmospheric pollutant. So it's something that it's completely new. If we take, for example, the chlorofluorocarbons, which are regulated under the Montreal Protocol. We have stopped the production, stopped the emission, and then nature has taken care of lowering the concentration. So this is to implement the DAX technology. It's something that has never been done before. So coming to the solar radiation modification, usually it's treated like the CDR as a general category of engineering, but it's completely different. Capture and storage of CO2 is a mitigation measure. Solar radiation modification is not. So what the solar radiation modification does is to mask the climate change problem by altering the Earth radiation budget. So it's not a solution, but it's something that could mask this. So we have already heard that there are several options, but the most commonly studies attempt to mimic the cooling effect of the volcanoes, like it was said before. And I must mention here that the first one to propose this was the late Paul Crutzen, Nobel laureate in chemistry, with whom I had the privilege to collaborate. And there are still big issues in this. So SRM has the potential in a period ranging from 10 to 20 years to offset warming, but it will not restore the climate to the previous state. SRM would not stop atmospheric CO2 concentration from increasing, and this has a very simple and known effect. It will increase the acidity of the ocean, which means that the ocean will absorb less CO2 from the air. So you have an opposite effect. If it was already said that if SRM is terminated in an high CO2 scenario, this would cause in a period of years a rapid warming, and there are still large uncertainty associated to feedbacks, which we still don't understand. Last but not least, there is a problem that everybody in the previous presentation has discussed, the problem of governance. So who decides what and when and how to do this thing? So the common wisdom from the scientific community is that solar radiation management introduce a widespread range of new risks to people and ecosystems, which are still not well understood. So the recommendation is to increase the efforts, the research efforts, but my conclusion is that solar radiation modification is not an issue that is on the table as today. It might be in the future, I don't know, but it's not an option as today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandro. Now we have time for question and answer. When I had a look to the program today, I was terrified. It was impossible to respect the time, but we have done a wonderful job. Thanks to all the speakers for this. And now we have one hand raised, please.
Thank you. I don't have, and so I will try to speak as well. It would be better if you just.
Si è acceso, sì.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is for Sandro Puzzi, because I think he was very rigid when he stated that solar radiation mitigation is not an option. But I was wondering if these two sets of technologies could work together, like carbon removal, dioxide options, together with solar radiation mitigation option.
Well, I can only confirm what I already said, that CDR is accepted now as a technology besides the difficulties that we still have, but it's a mitigation measure. The SRM is not a mitigation. Is something that masks a problem, but it won't solve it. And in addition, we don't have the knowledge about possible feedbacks.
My question to you also again about the CDR. You show one diagram, a lot of CDR technology. My question is, are all those technologies like equal? Like different technology may have different side effects. Like those technologies may also increase the carbon emission sometime by applying it. And are all the technologies are ready to use? That's my question.
Well, the biological technique with this planting of trees, that's something that is already in use. It's clear that it won't be enough for any amount of trees that you could plant. So the CDR of capturing and storing the CO2 today is already working, but we still have very few activities in this sense. When you take the CO2 in big concentration from simply, for example, from a cement industry, the CO2 from the air is still far from being accomplished.
Yeah, we have another question.
Thank you very much. Ziba again. Actually, I have a general comment, and then I have a question for Mr. Sanbuk. Actually, considering that the oceans generate more than half of oxygen that we breathe,
and it actually absorbs and captures the heat of the greenhouse gas emissions, and actually absorbs between 25 to 31% of the CO2. And I think that whatever solution that climate engineering can bring to the table has to take into consideration not compromising this carbon sink, because not only it is considered lungs for the planet, but it's also a vital buffer against climate change impacts. So I think that should be taken into consideration, finding whatever solution in other fields. And my questions goes back to the vagueness, to the methodological issues in terms of precautionary and vagueness. I wanted to ask Mr. Sandbook, what are the precautions he meant, and what does he mean? Like, what kind of precautionary that we have? Is it ethical or cultural or political, or what kind of precautionary should we take into consideration?
Thank you. Good.
Yeah, thank you for the really important question. There are many versions of precautionary principles or approaches taken up by various institutions, including UN, and UN's official position on this is expressed in 1992 Rio Convention, when the precautionary principle is understood as a very cautious and a negative way, meaning that if you have a certain risk, uncertainties involved in the future scenario of your action, if you have a cost-effective measure to tackle that disastrous effect, then even when that action is not guaranteed scientifically to prevent that disastrous effect, you can still use rationally that action. So meaning it's a very complicated, meaning is precautionary principle in that particular context is used to override purely the risk-based approach that if you have any risk, you shouldn't do this. So actually, precautionary principle in that context is quite active in the sense that you can take measures to prevent certain harms, even when you are not guaranteed to prevent that harm, right? I think that way of approaching precautionary approach is better than a more commonsensical solution that if you have any risk of your action, you shouldn't do this. That's quite intuitively quite plausible, but it's not really actionable because there are so many risks involved, so many uncertainties involved. Thank you.
There was a person from people attending remotely. Is there any questions from the people attending remotely? Just quick note, I am filling in for Professor David, but he's the old one. Okay. It's very old. Very old. Okay. And we have no other comment.
Okay.
Oh, done.
I have a comment on Julia's presentation. You mentioned that in some cases science could be de facto policy maker. It's difficult for me to understand this because, for example, the IPCC states at the very beginning that the IPCC reports are policy related, but not policy prescriptive, because science is only one part of the global issue. So policy must have the last word, because it has or should have a more complete picture.
Thank you. I call you have to reply, and then Emma join me while Julia will reply.
Yeah, I think the idea behind this is actually very straightforward, in the sense that you have to, I mean, if you fund research, there's only limited resources, right? Especially if we talk about national programs that are being developed and so forth. And so I think the basic argument is that we cannot let the scientific community sort of organically, decide what kinds of questions to answer, but we have to deliberately think about what kinds of questions need to be addressed from which kinds of disciplines and so forth. It's actually very much, I think, in touch with everything that we've been discussing today, in the sense that, the physical perspective of the physical risks is important for certain aspects. And then if you want to say, is this a solution or not, like the question before, I mean, is CDR actual technology that we can deploy? I think it needs then other kinds of research, and the others would agree to this, to answer. And so I think the idea behind the toxic governance is just that it's not so simple to just say we need natural scientific research and then we have all the facts and decide, how to keep shape and avoid overshoot, but it's a bit more complex.
Well, now, Emma, closing remarks. Okay.
Thank you. I am not 100% certain why I have this honor. As the group knows, I am, even so, I'm very honored. I think the most important thing for me is that we have the PhD students here. So I'm not going to make any profound scientific announcements about the discussions, but this in fact is one, because this is the way in which we have to solve these problems. So the fact that all of you are here and the fact that you are part of this kind of PhD program shows that maybe, at least in some ways, we might be moving in the right direction. So I want from our side to thank you for attending and to sit through all our very boring discussions. And I hope it meant something to you. Even if it just meant, and that brings me to the second point, to see that deliberating about these issues at a policy advice level and at an intergovernmental level is really hard work. It isn't something that you just do because, it's nice to do it or because it has to be done, or people in specifically CEST, which is the Commission on the Ethics of Scientific Knowledge and Technology at UNESCO, we take these issues very, very, very seriously. Every single issue that we have written reports on, it's something that we care about within ourselves. We do this on top of everything else that we do, our normal day jobs, because we care. So it takes a lot of deliberation, it takes a lot of dedication, but that's the only way in which we can solve the kinds of problems that your generation faces. So for me, this showed again that the conversations with the public, the conversations with students, the conversations among academics, and in the conversations when we bring in the intergovernmental and the policy side. All of these are so important. And for me, it's part of the social contract that any university has with civil society to try and mitigate and mediate, not mitigate, mediate these kinds of conversations. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Just one word about when we talk about climate change, what should we do? Climate change is a global phenomenon. Okay, and at the global level, there is no solution at hand. Okay? And so this creates a sense of frustration. But experiments, let's say, as Emma said, experiments like this meeting, where we have a piece of the UNESCO, that is your institution, a piece of PhD students, PhD program, and so on. The participation of scientists from other disciplines and groups. This gives us a sense something is possible. It depends, it is in our hands, okay? And so when I stress the importance of the role of citizens, I really think that important. And we are all citizens, we are all people. But this night event is the result of unbelievable cooperation. Okay, we have, I want to thank personally Anna Cermiglia and Chiara Mussi that I can say here that without going, no meetings. And then I want to thank Mario Martina, because if we had this nice participation of PhD students, it's merit and again, for all the students, PhD students, all the speakers, very, very nice group of people, in fact, at the time, and then Adele di Taranto, Secretariat of the Commerce Commission. So, yeah. Thank you so much.